one thing that comes to mind is that I have heard time and time again, high UN officials say that the UN agenda cannot happen without the feminist agenda. That's very, very telling, because what it tells us is the power of mothers, the power of women who believe in faith, in family, and in their identities as mothers. Why? Because we actually create human bodies. Like we are the vehicle by which human bodies come to this earth. And then not only that, but we get to shape their minds and hearts and values and identity. And you do that with time. You do that by sacrificing and being there for your kids. And so it's really critical. And clearly the UN agenda cannot happen without the feminist agenda that promotes everything, that's antithetical to mothers, motherhood. It's climb the corporate ladder. It's, all access abortion. And then it's like this kind of like, how backwards is it to be a woman that wants to nurture her children and to be there for her family? But that's the superpower. Like it really is, it boils down to that is the extreme power to influence that mothers have. Yeah. It's built into their actual bodies. And so I think that it's really powerful to recognize that and to wake more women up.
Yeah, it's the hand that rocks the cradle rules the world. Yep. And what the state says is that will be our hand. Yeah. And, this is where I struggle with, with Utah is we are very religious based. Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is so pro-family. I mean, the proclamation of the family, that document ironically was just ripped up at BYU this last few months ago. So for a state, that's why it doesn't make sense to me. So for a state that values family, that values motherhood, that says that gender is eternal and that men and women have unique and separate divine roles, why are we so in bed more than any other state with an organization who is outward in their and very not hiding that their agenda is to destroy the family? Yeah. Help me make sense of that.
I can't help you make sense of that. I don't know. I do not know why that's happening.
Like first I would expect our legislators who are mostly of that faith to say, no, we believe in the family. This is what the agenda you are pushing here is antithetical to the principles which we espouse. That should be the first layer of defense. The second is the church would stand up and say, this stuff goes completely against the values and the principles, the eternal principles of truth. And yet I'm seeing nothing in this state but welcoming this, this organization with arms spread wide and spreading it around.
Yeah, it's really disturbing and frustrating, to be honest. And I think that we just need to wake up to it. The people. We are the people.
And welcome back to We're the People. This is your host, Jason Preston, with my lovely bride, Alexia Preston.
Most days.
Is today one of those days?
We shall see.
Thank you guys for tuning in. Today's show is brought to you by Timothy Blue. We appreciate him. We appreciate all of you guys who are helping us get this message out. All of you who are sharing, all of you who are liking and commenting and subscribed. We appreciate you guys. Remember to go to our website and sign up for the newsletter. Okay, we want to jump into it. Our whole message, it's consistent. It's always about our backyard. That's where you have the ability to make a difference. What can you do in DC? Very little. But what can you do in your backyard? You can do so much. But one of the interesting things that we talk about, because we're not talking about Trump. We don't talk about Elon Musk, although I don't trust Elon Musk at all. And I know everyone's on that train, but we're not going to get into that here. But we do talk about something that people may well wonder, why do you talk about the UN? Because we talk about the UN and the World Economic Forum a lot. And the reason is the UN is very much in bed with Utah. And remember, Utah is the only state that the United Nations meets in outside of New York, outside of their headquarters. Why is that? We've talked about the agendas tied to the UN, because the agendas tied to the UN are going to be eventually affecting this entire country, including our backyard. A lot of the things that you see that seem very biblical, a lot of the darkness that we've talked about, the satanic origins that come out of the United Nations. There's a lot there, and it's affecting us. We have a guest today I'm very excited about. I would consider her a close friend of ours, who's just coming back from the United Nations. She's, I'll let Alexia introduce her in just a minute, but she's going to be talking today about what she saw there and why it matters to you, because what they're doing there is very much about implementing it, not just at the national level, but in the local level. So let's jump into that. But Alexia, you're up.
Awesome. Well, we are thrilled to have with us today in the studio Carolina Allen. She is the founder and director of Big Ocean Women. If you haven't heard of Big Ocean Women, it is an international, actually UN accredited group that focuses on faith, family, and motherhood. How can people get involved with Big Ocean Women if they want to?
We would love help and support, and you can definitely get involved on our website, bigoceanwomen.org. You can go in, the section on the website that says to get involved, and you can fill out a form, and we have people that will reach out to you and get you connected. And we organize in local chapters, so we are very much true to the grassroots movement. And so we do a lot of leadership training and education, and how parents at home and mothers especially can protect their families and be aware of the coming tides.
Awesome. That's bigoceanwomen.com.
Yeah.
Awesome.
bigoceanwomen.org.
.org, just like wearethepeople.org. So we are going to talk about your recent visit today to the UN, where you were invited out there to hear this conference that they have. What is it, annually?
It's an annual conference. It's called the Commission on the Status of Women, and we've been attending now I've been for 11 years now in our organization, for 10 years. And so the UN has a lot of different forums and different meetings that they have around the world, and really important outcome documents come from that. And so we attend every year. We like to keep a pulse on what's happening there because it really does impact us at home.
Awesome. So can you run us through what your main takeaways were from this conference this year?
Sure. So the biggest thing that I'd love to share today with you is that a lot of times we think it doesn't matter what happens over there, and I think that maybe 20, 30 years ago that was true. But the way that the UN has been transitioning through the years, they really are intended to make it hit at the home front now. And so it is in everyone's best interest to know what happens there, because it used to kind of trickle down through the nation, this language that they're coming up with over there. And then it would eventually hit us at home. But now it's like a direct pipeline. And in fact, I'd love to explain more about this. It would take another episode, but about the infrastructural things in place that have made that lightning speed,
So we've had people on the show before. We've had Kim Ellis and Lisa Logan talk about their takeaways from the UN conferences. That was mostly focused on education. But it looks like what we'll talk about today is more, in addition to education, language, behavior modification, which I find really interesting, and then religion, and then maybe we'll bring you back for another show and talk about city planning.
Yes, that sounds perfect. Yeah, absolutely. So have you guys ever seen the movie The Devil Wears Prada?
Of course. I don't know about Jason, but
you haven't?
He's not too fond of chick flicks.
Well, there's a little segment in this movie that Miranda, played by Meryl Streep or whatever, and then there's this intern, Andy. There's this little exchange between them that is really golden to explain how international soft law becomes an actual legally binding treaty. Mm-hmm. So in it, they're rushing, trying to get the clothes on the runway, and this other lady holds up two belts that look almost identical to us, and the intern, Andy, kind of chuckles and scuffs at it. And then Miranda Priestley turns to her and just levels her and pretty much says that, don't you know, that this is actually cerulean blue? Or she makes fun of her sweater, okay, because she's wearing this blue sweater. She's like, it's not this color blue, it's not this color blue, it's cerulean blue. And it was designed for you by the people in this room. And then where you fished it out of a clearance bin is what she says. And that is exactly what's happening at the United Nations, because they are the designers of the language that then becomes consensus language, that other nations start to think that it's agreed upon in consensus, and then it appears in their legal documents nationally. Well, the UN, through infrastructural planning, has gone through the back door and made, the whole slew of different kinds of cities that you've heard of, 15-minute cities, safe cities,
Smart cities.
Smart cities, the whole litany of them, they're all the same thing. It's a UN plan. And then they get implemented there through their mayor network and stuff that we can talk about next time. But the language, at first, people say, well, it's not binding language. Well, sure, but it eventually does become binding, and it's becoming binding now, quite quickly. And there's just a lot of concern with their designer language because, as we know, language carries with it belief systems, attitudes, ideologies, and everything. And, if you wonder, like, how is it that we changed as a society so quickly? It's because of that.
Can you give an example?
Yeah, I had it all on here on my slides, which hopefully we can make available for people. But one example is, and I before I get into this, I want to share some quotes coming out of the UN because some people might say, well, look, the United Nations is for peace building. It's a good thing. We've got the Sustainable Development Goals. But I just want to read what actual people have said, like high UN officials have said about the New World Order and global transformation. Like, it's not a theory. Like, they're very open about it, and it's time we listen. Like, they're literally telling us what they're doing, and I don't understand how people aren't believing them. Like, we need to believe people when they say they're going to do something because they're doing it.
And we've done, I think, a whole show on the Sustainable Development Goals with Lisa Logan that we can put in the link below, and just how nefarious that is despite all the great wordsmithing around it.
Yeah, there's 17 goals, but there's like 169 targets that break things down even more. And so it becomes very entrenched. And then all the language that's redefined and codified in that stuff. And then people sign on to it. They think it's nice. They don't understand that they're really redefining the language and the words. So New World Order. So this is Amina Mohammed, UN Deputy Secretary General. She says, we are building a new world order and where people, planet, and prosperity are at the heart of everything we do. Okay, another quote. Audrey Azoulay, who's the UNESCO General Director, she's like, we are in the midst of a global transformation where access to education, culture, and knowledge will determine the future of humanity. So then we have, this is Secretary General, I got to see him and be in the same room with him just this week, Antonio Guterres, and he's said so many very, very overt things. But the one that he says, we're in a defining moment for humanity. The world must change, and it must change now. We're on the brink of a global transformation. And then just this week, I sat right in this big General Assembly hall. There's like a big golden kind of column, and he sits in this marbled, this green marble kind of a thing. It's really kind of creepy. And he, he announced to everybody, good morning, feminists, and everybody's clapping. And and then he uses a lot of communist rhetoric. Like he says, we need a pushback against the pushback. Power isn't given, it's taken. If they don't hear you, you yell louder. Demand the funding for your movements. Wow. So there's just a lot that happens there. But in sharing a quote that happened right in our backyards at Utah Valley University in 2023, I attended that, and I would love to, share the actual transcript of the presentation. But it was by Kasaba Kurosi. He was the former president of the UN General Assembly. He really gave a chilling speech. And listen to this. He had like this image on the projector, and it's like of this. He had the word Anthropocene up there, and Anthropocene pretty much means that we're like in this new era where human beings have created such a dismal impact on the earth that we need some kind of a radical transformation again, right? So he says, from crisis management, this is the name of the presentation, from crisis management to transformation, the UN in a brave new world. That's what it's called. And then he says, we have gone through many crises during this history of humankind. Now we're in a deepened geopolitical divide, and a new world order is in the making. And when there's a new world order in creation, there are many side effects and many casualties in the process. He literally said that. It was a small little group.
That was at UVU.
That was at UVU, right in our backyard.
And I do remember that. I remember there's a lot of our politicians there all sucking up to these guys and kissing up and being very excited to have these globalists there here to hear them talking about the New World Order. And it's like, you guys are Utah. Like, shouldn't we be against that stuff?
It was really amazing because I sat and was kind of on the peripheral watching a lot of these, Utah, people, like you said, really sucking up to these people. And I was just kind of like blown away. I could not believe it. It was really wild. And it's about time that we believe what they're saying, they're doing, right? So none of this, oh no, it's a good thing. No, like they're very clear about what it is. And we're really witnessing this reconstruction of a new world order. And the tricky thing is people are like, well, prove it. Well, the UN system is so complicated. It's the way that I like to describe it. It's like an octopus with just tentacles everywhere. And then those tentacles split off into all these other tentacles. It's just really hard to get a grasp on it. So then people can't quite articulate it. So then they feel like a little bit self-conscious and like, well, maybe they aren't doing anything too bad or whatever. But Big Ocean Women, our organization, we have over a decade of experience, and it's not just like me going, it's not just one person, because I could misinterpret something. But when you have whole teams going year after year and to multiple different UN conferences, and then you get to see the pattern laid out right in front of you. And so what we've done is we have kind of organized it in such a way that you can make sense of it. And that's what we want to make available to as many people as possible.
That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll be honest, every now and then when we've had Lisa and she's tried to disseminate what goes on at those conferences, just talking about education, sometimes I say to her, just explain it to me like I'm a 5-year-old. And I still feel like half of it goes over my head. So Lisa, I appreciate you always breaking it down for us, but really looking forward to getting your perspective as well.
Yeah. So the UN, it has these like 6 organs, they call it. And those organs then have these specialized organs on the side. And then you've got like almost 4,000 different civil society organizations and NGOs. And then you've got all these multilateral organizations that are all collaborating together. Then you've got all of the big money coming in. And so it makes it like tentacles, right? So I want to list off all the UN agencies, all the UN specialized agencies like UNFPA, UNICEF, UNAID, UNDP. UNDP is like UNFPA is the Population Fund. UNICEF is the United Nations arm for children. It's like the Children's Fund. And then you have like UNAID, you have UN Women, you have Habitat 3, which talks all about the infrastructural stuff. So you've got all of these other things on the side. And then combine that with the Sustainable Development Goals and all of their targets. And it's just like a mess. Yeah. It's like a big web, right?
And some of these things you can't even opt out of. I know, and we've spent time previously overseas, certain hotels partner with UNESCO. And I don't know if a portion of their proceeds go there, but it's things that you're no longer even able to opt out of.
Yeah, yeah. And it's really designed that way. One thing that we've noticed that's a pattern that's helped us like map things together is that the UN is working with 2 sides of the same coin. And science and technology is the perfect bridge that's kind of bridging these 2 operations. So they've often said in all of our meetings, we constantly hear you have to deconstruct something and like tear it apart in order to rebuild it. And so what we've seen in the past few, presidencies, and for some time now really, is the deconstruction of our social fabric that's come through like these social mechanisms that have just broken down the fabric of our society socially. So like I said, the language, the education, the behavior modification strategies, and even like religion. And I'll explain a little bit more of that in a second.
I want to read a quote from Karl Marx. Okay, so the last paragraph of the Communist Manifesto, Karl Marx. The communists disdain to conceal their views and aims. They openly declare that their ends can be attained only by the forcible overthrow of all existing social conditions. So in other words, burn everything down, which is the phoenix, right? Burn everything down, burn the family, burn down society, burn down the Constitution, burn down, the Constitution, and then rebuild their new satanic world order on it.
Yeah, absolutely.
But use pretty words in order to make it sound more palatable.
Yeah. And when you have a society, when the fabric of society has just, been burned, essentially, first, it's important to understand how it came to be. That's critical, and I can explain that in a minute. But then they're able, just like, let's take, for example, the Maui fires, right? So you have this beautiful community that is now burned to the ground, and then the reconstruction process, that's where you have to keep your eye on everything. Like, what exactly is happening there? How are they going to rebuild? What does that look like? And it's the same thing. There's the same pattern that's happening in society.
And same thing with LA.
Yeah, LA and
to rebuild for the Olympics and their new, again.
Absolutely.
Well, smart cities. That's
Yeah.
that's the whole
That's
conspiracy right now, that
Yeah.
these are getting burned down to pave way for smart cities.
They're not. Yeah, they're definitely not conspiracies. They're like, they are conspiracies, but they're not theoretical anymore. They're very, very. You just have to do your research, and you can find all the evidence you want.
Well, so it reminds me of the quote from Ezra Taft Benson: "There's no such thing as conspiracy theory; it's conspiracy fact."
Yeah, conspiracy facts. So many conspiracy facts. So with these two sides of the coin, you break down, like in, for example, Oregon. Oregon has like a whole statewide mandate for all of these, city kind of structures. And they have like, everything that happened there with, decriminalizing a ton of,
Drugs.
criminal activity. And then it just brought in all of the different drugs that came with it. And you destabilize the community. You make it unsafe. You make it a scary place to be. And then people will clamor or, acquiesce to all of the different solutions that they pose. So that's the point. And through science and technology, this used to be kind of a pie in the sky idea a while ago, but now the science is caught up, and there's a seamless merger between now the reconstruction phase of the deconstruction, right? So it's really, really been interesting. So let's get on with language. We talked a little bit about that language, but what's something really important to talk about with this designer language is that there's this, what you call international soft law. So the UN, for example, will have the Commission on the Status of Women, or a Habitat 3 conference, or some kind of like a Rio conference, right? And then they'll produce these outcome documents, and countries will come in and they'll haggle. They'll kind of work through the language. And there are very few countries in the world today that can withstand the kind of pressure that the really wealthy countries exert on them during these negotiation processes. So all of the Nordic countries, the EU, all of these rich countries, okay, and the United States is a part of that as well, they go and they kind of bully the smaller, tiny little countries like Vanuatu, like some little island community, right, that still hold traditional family values and that think that family is important, and they bully them. And so these outcome documents now have language or have excluded language, and I'll explain why I said the word excluded here in a minute. But then you create this kind of a charter or whatever, and then in time, different nations start to use the language and use the language and use the language in their judicial system and their court systems with different politicians and things. And then what's created is binding law. So like, for example, the Rio Earth Summit or Agenda 21 that happened in 1992, that was soft law. But then in 2015 came the Paris Agreement, and then that's like binding treaty. So countries that have signed on to that, it's kind of a serious thing. And so one that my organization is really keyed in on is CEDAW. So it's the Convention to Eradicate All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, CEDAW. So when the feminists lost the ERA here in the United States, they went and set up camp at the United Nations, and they passed CEDAW in 1979. So that's an example of it just became binding law. And so now they've gone through the back door and they've created a lot of CEDAW cities around the world. And Utah, Salt Lake City, likes to flaunt that they were the first CEDAW city.
Really?
Yep.
So what is this? So give us what is a CDOS city then?
A
Again?
CDOS city is like a UN city, but if you think of all the different cities that they have, 15-minute city, smart city, whatever, a CDOS city is angled to market towards women's equality and women's safety. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
A 15-minute city is kind of marketed like for transportation and environmental reasons or whatever. Smart city is the high surveillance and technology and monitoring type stuff. So they kind of market it to different audiences and different people. It's all the same kind of infrastructural plan.
And the same end goal.
The same angle, yeah. So a CDOS city, Salt Lake City became a CDOS city. It was the first one in the nation.
Wow.
Even that was not a national, federal thing. That was a globalist thing. So that was a UN.
It sure was.
It's like a testing base, or why was it in Salt Lake as opposed to elsewhere?
Well, we're kind of skipping a little bit, but the angle is to promote like women's rights globally, and there's 189 countries that have ratified the convention on CEDAW. And in the United States, we have over 40 cities and local governments that have adopted ordinances or resolutions. And so how do cities get these resolutions passed? Well, there's over 12,000 cities that are involved in what's called the Global Covenant of Mayors. That's how it happens. It goes through mayors. So you have a mayor that gets wined and dined and promised all sorts of things, and they sign this pledge, and then they're plugged into the mayor network, the International Mayor Network. And then
Which one of our, do you know what Utah mayors are part of that?
Well, probably Salt Lake mayor would make sense.
Mendenhall for sure.
Mendenhall.
Yeah. And so then they get to, they're plugged into this network. They sign this formal commitment letter. The commitment letter is open-ended, and it can last. It can roll over to the next mayor. And then it helps with measuring and reporting. So it's going to become a measuring and reporting city. There are financial incentives and resources, collaboration with this international network with best practices and how to get things done. So California and Oregon both have statewide resolutions. So every city in that state is a CEDAW city. And so Utah became the first one again back in 2007. It was the first one in the nation. So
right after the Olympics. Well, 5 years after the Olympics, but still.
Yeah. So that's the backdoor approach. That's why people need to care what's happening at the UN, because it's not going to somehow have this more fair and balanced kind of thinking and debating about it at the national level. I mean, it's literally coming to your back door.
And they're giving you the blueprint.
Yeah, absolutely. So let me go back to, and I can, in the second installment and the second episode, if you guys are wanting to, I can really dig deep. But there's so much important stuff just with the social stuff, too.
That's interesting, too, because, how Salt Lake became the first CDOT city. And it's interesting that, when they started talking about doing smart cities, that initially the point was supposed to be the first smart city. Mm-hmm. And obviously, I think it became a lot of pushback.
Yeah.
And so I think they had to retreat a little bit. And so they're still moving forward with it, but now they have to be much more careful because of the public.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. That's why this stuff matters.
Absolutely, because they switch names all the time. So then, you could go and call out a politician and be like, you're doing this thing. And they're like, well, no, we're not, because I don't know. They just switched the verbiage, the acronym, to be something else. There's a million of them. There's safe cities, sustainable cities, 15-minute cities, C40 cities. So all of that is the same. It's coming from the same source. It's the same thing.
And just gives the politician an excuse to say, oh, we're not doing that.
Well,
exactly.
It's no different than when you had your interaction with Cox and you asked him about being the first smart state. And he said, but he straight up denied even knowing anything about smart cities.
Yeah.
So we can maybe say, did this city plan originate from the United Nations?
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, no, you're
right.
So
one thing that my organization is really keeping tabs on, okay, so we're talking about language right now. In 2023, so a couple of years ago, at the United Nations, what would you guess are the two most highly contested words?
Gender,
family,
probably.
Family.
And God.
God's not even in it.
God's already gone. He was gone.
He was kicked out a long time ago.
Yeah, he was never invited.
He was never invited. But the word
Family
mother,
and faith, mother. Oh, mother.
The word mother was really important because so many of these global challenges impact women really significantly. Okay, that's just how it is. And to have the word mother in there it's a gendered word. And so the UN has been on this kick to kind of neuter all of our language.
Birthing person.
Birthing person, chest feeder, you know, you're a menstruating person. The word mother is really critical to include in there. So the family's been very, very highly contested. And in 2023, there were some like pro-family nations, like Hungary was one of them in the EU. They were bullied so badly by the rest of the big developing EU countries that they backed down and they allowed to take the word mother out. And what they're replacing it with is unpaid care worker.
Oh my gosh.
Geez.
So unpaid care work is language that my organization is keeping very close tabs on. Okay. And it's extremely
How demeaning. Unpaid care worker.
Yep. So
Oh, you're an unpaid care worker? Oh.
well, they have a plan
That's
for
what
that.
you do?
They have, yeah, but it is very demeaning. Absolutely, it's a slap in the face. But the UN's document on redistribute unpaid care work. So they're constantly saying, from cooking and cleaning, this is a direct quote, to taking care of children and the elderly, women carry out at least 2.5 times more unpaid household work and care than men. Okay. And so they want to, it's called the 3 R's. They want to recognize, they want to reduce, and redistribute the care work. So we have a close friend from Sweden. Her name's Madeline, and she's, involved with an awesome organization called HARO. And in Sweden, it's really important to kind of look at other countries to see how they got there. Some are farther ahead than we are in how quickly things are declining. So Sweden is one of those countries. In fact, they're the ones that fund a majority of all of this stuff. So my friend Madeline from HARO, she's like, you can't even be a stay-at-home mother. It's not even an option in Sweden anymore. She's like, United States, wake up before this becomes you, right? So they've reduced it and they've redistributed it so much that at one point it was okay and it was highly valued for her to leave her own kids and then to take care of other people's kids. Like, it literally makes no sense. But because, and everybody touts Sweden as like the gold standard for parental rights, like for paid parental leave. And what she's told us is that is such a smoke and mirrors, because what happens is everybody is taxed like an abhorrent amount. I want to say like 60%, it may even be higher than that, into the social protection networks that they have there in Sweden. And you can have paid parental leave for a year, but at the 1 year mark, you better get your butt back into the workforce to pay for all of that stuff, right? So if a mother wants to stay home with their children, it's easier for a father to do that than for a mother.
You know, it's just interesting and there's a reason that we don't teach our children or in our universities about the Soviet Union or about the communist, about the, what happened in Russia with Mao. But in the Soviet Union, they were so effective at first allowing anyone no fault divorce. Abortion became just anybody could have an abortion. But one of the next things was pulling the children out of the home. And and they did a very good job with doing exactly this. It was very demeaning to be a mother. In fact, it was looked as selfish to raise your children.
Yes.
Like as if to think that your children belong to you was seen as a selfish act. And the idea was that the children belong to the state.
Yes.
And that's exactly where this is going. And that's where our schools are going right now. You look at a lot of legislation passed here in Utah where they're pushing, that the mental health belongs to the school. The school is pulling more and more power. The discretion over the kids' phones now belongs to the state. Like, the state is pulling more and more power, and they're touting it to the parents that's giving them freedom. Mm-hmm. Like, you have time to go. And this is what they did in Russia. So for us, those who've studied what happened in the Soviet Union, it's like red flag, red flag, red flag. That people here are just saying, oh, they're giving us more freedom, more autonomy. Like, oh yeah, we have more options for our kids and more options to progress in our careers. But in reality, what we're seeing is we are seeing the family be torn apart, and we're seeing the state take complete authority over the children.
Yeah, it's a major wake-up call. And I think one thing that comes to mind, I'm kind of all over the place with what I was like, the strategy that I was going to share, but I love this. One thing that comes to mind is that I have heard time and time again, high UN officials say that the UN agenda cannot happen without the feminist agenda. That's very, very telling, because what it tells us is the power of mothers, the power of women who believe in faith, in family, and in their identities as mothers. Why? Because we actually create human bodies. Like we are the vehicle by which human bodies come to this earth. And then not only that, but we get to shape their minds and hearts and values and identity. And you do that with time. You do that by sacrificing and being there for your kids. And so it's really critical. And clearly the UN agenda cannot happen without the feminist agenda that promotes everything, that's antithetical to mothers, motherhood. It's climb the corporate ladder. It's, all access abortion, right? And so, and then it's like this kind of like, how backwards is it to be a woman that wants to nurture her children and to be there for her family? But that's the superpower. Like it really is, it boils down to that is the extreme power to influence that mothers have. Yeah. It's built into their actual bodies. And so I think that it's really powerful to recognize that and to wake more women up. Yeah,
it's the hand that rocks the cradle rules the world. Yep. And what the state says is that will be our hand. Yeah. And, this is where I struggle with, with Utah is we are very religious based. Church of Jesus Christ Latter-day Saints is so pro-family. I mean, the proclamation of the family, that document ironically was just ripped up at BYU this last few months ago. So for a state, that's why it doesn't make sense to me. So for a state that values family, that values motherhood, that says that gender is eternal and that men and women have unique and separate divine roles, why are we so in bed more than any other state with an organization who is outward in their and very not hiding that their agenda is to destroy the family? Yeah. Help me make sense of that.
I can't help you make sense of that. I don't know. I do not know why that's happening.
Like first I would expect our legislators who are mostly of that faith to say, no, we believe in the family. This is the agenda you are pushing here is antithetical to the principles which we espouse. Yeah. That should be the first layer of defense. The second is I would accept the church would stand up and say, this stuff goes completely against the values and the principles, the eternal principles of truth. Mm-hmm. And yet I'm seeing nothing in this state but welcoming this, this organization with arms spread wide and spreading it around.
Yeah, it's really disturbing and frustrating, to be honest. And I think that we just need to wake up to it. The people, we are the people, We need to have eyes wide open and understand how these mechanisms are working. And then we need to work in an opposite fashion. The way that me and my group understand a lot of it is that the UN is this big mechanical machine that needs to consume, and it's these cogs and wheels, and it's very clunky, to be honest. And the way that God has established this other organic way to solve global problems, it's through the family, it's through mothers and children, communities, intergenerational connectedness, all of these different things. These are like organic ways to literally solve all of the SDGs. Like, fine, you want to have the SDGs, we can solve them in a way more efficient way. The problem is money. This machine, it kind of breaks things apart so that it can have more work and produce more money to fix the problems. So they're like intentionally, in my opinion, creating problems or doing them or claiming to solve problems in the most backwards kind of like unsustainable way, because it creates and it generates more gross national product or something. Yeah. And so, but I think that there are way more easy, efficient, and sustainable ways to engage, in helping heal the world. And I think Big Ocean Women is been doing that. Like our global strategy committee, which is like our think tank arm, that's just a fraction of what we do. Most of what we do is we collaborate with people and women all over the world and help them to be self-reliant and to have their eyes open and to protect their families and their communities and to solve these like SDGs that are out there, but to do it in a really more productive way. So one thing that's important to share is that in Sweden, so their anti-parental rights culture has made it impossible for mothers to stay at home. And there's many families that have had to become homeschool refugees. They've had to flee Sweden, or else their children would have been taken away from them to, a small island off the coast of Finland, just to be able to homeschool their children. So it's important that, our homeschool communities and parents here in Utah wake up to understand that this unpaid care work language is going to start popping up. Mm-hmm. And when it does, they're going to try to reduce and then redistribute it. And once the government has their fingers in your home, it's just not a good thing for your family.
Lexi, wouldn't you say that goes along with the backpack bill? Legislation where for the state to be able to, what do they call the backpack bill, right? Where basically school choice, where basically the whole thing is, school choice, we're going to give money. If you're going to choose to homeschool your kids, you can basically have money allocated towards that. Mm-hmm. But the flip side of that, and the reason people who really understand what that was about is it allows, once you accept that money from the state, now the state gets to oversee what's being taught in the homeschool, and now they have control over the homeschool.
Yeah.
So there's so many slippery things that if you're not watching, it's so easy to get manipulated by these people.
One thing that's really, really critical to talk about is comprehensive sexuality education. So in the education now component of things, we talked about language, and now in education. Comprehensive sexuality education was highly, highly influenced by a man named Alfred Kinsey. And if you viewers don't know who Alfred Kinsey is, I'll give you just a tiny snapshot. He was a very, very sick individual who couched his research. It was really child abuse is what it was. And there's Table 34 shares openly how he hired a pedophile to abuse over 196 children, some months old, toddlers, infants, toddlers, children, and up to adolescents. 196. He timed their orgasms. So he was abusing them and he had them timed. And then Alfred Kinsey came out and said, see, children are sexual from birth. So that idea that children are sexual from birth is the bedrock philosophy that undergirds comprehensive sexuality education, okay? Wow. So Kinsey goes on to form SECUS, which is like the Sexuality Education and Information form of the United States. And then all of the Kinsey philosophy is deeply embedded in a lot of these UN, like UNESCO and UNICEF and all of these different things. And I'm going to explain how comprehensive sexuality education gets funneled directly to our children. I just want to add one thing. I don't want to derail, but I think it's very important to understand that, the evil of men like this, because Utah is a state that has a huge problem with pedophilia. I think it's starting to come out. Yes. That like people are starting to wake up to how rampant it is. But a lot of these people who are these, pedophiles, they justify it by the teachings of people like this. Say, these kids, it's good for the kids to have these sexual experiences. That we're not harming them, and so they're raping these kids and thinking that's okay because it's good that they're having these sexual experiences. It's horrible.
Well,
yes.
And you talk about language, the whole minor attracted person jargon that popped up within the last few years makes it socially acceptable then to have these call it preferences, which are in any other time a grotesque perversion of our children.
Yeah. So one of the philosophies that they espouse is that the thing that makes it harmful for children is the shame surrounding it, and also these like Christian values that's the problem. That's why kids are having all sorts of issues with their abuse. Is that that there are like good ways to prepare children for the abuse, or that it's seen as abuse. That's the thing that they're trying to erode, is these attitudes values and feelings around this kind of sexuality. And the problem is it's with the word sexuality or sexual. So it's true that human beings are sexed from birth. Like we have those parts. But it's the same way if I were to have a beautiful rose, a little rosebud that I know eventually will flower and grow and mature and become a flower. But it's like prying those little tiny precious petals open. And what happens when you do that is you literally destroy that future flower. And so that's what we need to understand, because the things that they're kind of promoting, like I have this slide here that I just wish I could share, but they have these facilitator manuals. So they're training people on how to sexualize children. So like at these youth camps and, after school programs and all these things, they train the trainers, and then they do this peer-to-peer kind of strategy. And the whole purpose is to change the kids' attitudes and feelings and their value system around sex.
And why that's pretty significant with the type of stories we've been covering lately, especially with the rampant ritual abuse, is this becomes then a generational problem. This isn't just ruining that rosebud from childhood. That perpetrator, more often than not, becomes a perpetrator themselves, and they create a systemic problem from that one disruption.
Yeah. So in their eyes, what they see is it's like the Judeo-Christian values that are the problem. That's the thing that is in the way of, it just being an expression. Let me show you the quote that's, or the kind of faulty thinking that is, codified in these different training manuals, okay? They say that sexuality is a fundamental part of life. It's the expression of who we are as human beings. Since when is sexuality our 24/7 identity, right? There's so much more to being human. And then this is the big one. People express their sexuality from birth. Let's stop and deconstruct that for a minute. People express their sexuality from birth. Since when does a child, an infant, express its sexuality? That's sick.
Yeah.
That's exactly the Keynesian kind of philosophy that undergirds this comprehensive sexuality education. And for the UN, if you were to go into these different negotiations and just hear all the different countries, they are obsessed with comprehensive sexuality education. They try to include it in everything, in every single little tiny nuance. It's just embedded in all of these outcome documents. And countries get bullied. And it's just so, devious, how they try to inculcate it into the different language that you really have to train these smaller countries on how to see it and how to argue it. They're in these negotiations for hours and hours and hours without even being able to drink water or eat food. And a lot of these pro-family organizations will sit outside and pray for these delegates to be strong and to just outlast the pressure that they get. It's so crazy what's happening at the international level regarding comprehensive sexuality education.
I'm sorry. I mean, we're talking to victims all the time here, and we're starting to find this is so rampant here. And I think the thing that, as you're talking, and I hear the way that comprehensive sexuality, how it, it's really, it justifies people abusing kids. It justifies the pedophilia that's here, and it gives them moral justification. So it's like, hey, this is something that gives me justification to do what I want to do, to satisfy, these evil urges that are within me. And I think, again, you look at the close relationship with the United Nations and Utah, and then the rampant, pedophilia and sexual abuse here, and I just can't not see the connections.
Yeah. And another big way that they do it too is consent education and stuff. Consent's a really tricky word because you want children to be aware so they protect themselves and don't get abused. But the way that consent is being used is that if the premise is that you're sexual from birth and that you have a right to sexuality, then it's just a way to erode the kids' value system until they are. For example, a lot of these trainings in page 67 to 70 in this ICANN package, it's a training model for mentors or whatever, they talk all about satirist, I don't even know some of these words, gerontosexuality, sexual preference from elderly by young people. Why do kids need to know about that? Pedophilia, sexual pleasure by having intercourse with children. let's say pederasty, bestiality, necrophilia, urophilia, coprophilia, sadism, masochism. These are things that they're educating children on. And then they say, well, you can consent to these things, but then they're like sexualizing them so young that it's like, isn't that like a kids' prefrontal cortex of their brains aren't even developed for them to even, be consenting to anything. Like children should be off limits, period. And then when you sexualize them and expose them to all of this stuff and say that it's natural, it's normal, it's part of being healthy, then that's a slippery slope when it comes to consent. Because under the umbrella of consent, they say the same things like, it's actually here in the manual where they put in the same thing, like an expression of your sexuality is the same like a hug, and they put that in the same category as anal sex.
What?
Yes. It's here. I'm looking right at it.
This is the UN.
These are the different kinds of training tools that they have for the people that are the trainers that are then going and doing these kids camps and these different kinds of, programs for children. So that's how they're being trained. And then they can go and then they can explain these things and kind of chip away at what kids are comfortable.
So this type of stuff is being taught to people here in Utah as well? Do we know that this stuff's being taught here in Utah?
Yes, it is. It's being taught. And I think that it's couched as all sorts of different kinds of programs. But the thing that undergirds all of it is comprehensive sexuality education. And what's below that is this kind of Keynesian, children are sexual from birth. And the UN is promoting, you have a right to sexuality. Children have a right to be sexed beings and to be sexual.
Yeah, I think there's got to be some pushback, but I think that we'll talk about that at the end. But yeah, I'm sorry, go on.
Yeah, so just this week, I just barely got back from the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women, and me and my colleague, we got front row seats to this very thing. And so it's really hard to get into some of these sessions, and we were able to get into this session, and we sat right behind one of the newest, UN Goodwill ambassadors, Millie Bobby Brown. We were like right behind her. And so UNICEF created this big campaign called Power for Girls. That's the campaign. And then they pull in these optics and like they get a really popular young actress or whatever. It used to be like Emma Watson, and they've had all these. So then in floods all the YWCA and the Girl Scouts. They have all their representatives, and then all these youth ambassadors come and they see this, cool girl, and they just hang on every word she says. And she's pretty much promoting abortion is what it was, is SRHR. So it's sexual, reproduction, healthcare, and rights. So then the UNICEF, collaborates with this bank, and the bank was called Wellspring Foundation. Wellspring Foundation is funded by the Ford Foundation, and then they funnel money directly into the programs, one of which was called Purposeful. That's the name of it for this session that we attended, Purposeful. And then Purposeful, this was new to me. I hadn't seen this before. They get cash transfer monies into the direct pockets of girls in developing nations in Africa to become activists. So the Purposeful website, it says that Purposeful is a feminist hub for girls activism rooted in Africa and working all around the world. So they train up these girl activists, and the biggest cash cow, like the biggest, golden cow for the feminist agenda is abortion rights. And so then they pay for activists to be trained. And so that's how it works. UNICEF gets the big umbrella idea and campaign, gets funding from here, gets the optics, has the programs on the ground, gets funneled directly to your girl.
That just seems like the overarching goal of the UN is just creating activists one way or another.
Yes.
Whether it's through any of these programs.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Because the role of the activist is to burn down and tear down, deconstruct what they call the patriarchy or Western civilization.
Yeah. Yep. And so then they have direct access to our children, to our youth. There's a huge focus on youth from the United Nations. One of our team attended this civil society summit with a huge focus on youth. We've attended, the one here that happened in 2019 in Salt Lake, and we brought a delegation of 50 youth, and these were sharp kids. And when they heard that the UN was trying to use their voice to manipulate things, they literally wrote their own outcome document and wrote it. And then at the big plenary session, at the big closing session, they all stood up and they turned their backs to the UN.
Wow.
That's cool.
They were awesome. So anyway, there's a huge target on children. There's a huge target on our children. And parents, we need to recognize that this is happening, and we need to step up into our power and influence our children and show them, almost like debrief with them, all the things that they're learning in these different spaces, and really re-emphasize our values and our, attitudes around these things. We need to know, like what's happening so that we can really be intentional about how we protect our children.
Is there an age group that you feel they're more targeting, like potentially
12-year-olds?
12. Why 12?
Well, we've heard the on several occasions people say that our target audience is 12-year-old girls.
That's
So
an
once you get them
interesting age.
that's the age I think where, you've got all these fun activities and camps and programs and after school things, and the girls are just out of their girlhood enough where they're wanting to, congregate and be together and like learn these more activisty, feministy kind
They're
of
looking for
principles.
identity at that age.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? They're no longer, their identity is no longer son and daughter and child and of the family. They start to spread it out
On
in the
the
world.
verge of adolescence.
Yeah, and now they have a different identity. And so this is the time they're forming an identity, which is the perfect time to capture them and help them, give them an identity.
Right.
And again, pull them from the mother, pull them from the family, and let the state.
And they're really pushing the peer-to-peer mentorship, really a lot.
So when you talk about the Keynesian ideologies that they were pushing with sexuality and potentially even gender and all those constructs, is that still their target age group is around 12, or is it in those more impressionable years up till 8 years old, where the mind is still forming?
Well, we're seeing. I mean, I was just at a training with other groups, and we heard from the tip of the spear, an organization share that they're seeing the word the life course over the life course. So literally, and then when you hear that, Kinsey's saying that children are sexual from birth, and I think that we're going to be seeing a lot more younger and younger ages because, that's the foundation that it's based on is children are sexual. You need to be teaching sexuality at, from birth. I don't know.
Yeah.
So
it explains the shift in gender dysphoria and sexuality over the last 5 years that we've been seeing at an alarming
it was very
pace.
fast. I feel like it happened really quite fast for it to be like an organic thing that people are really thinking about. It was just, it's been promoted and pushed and marketed in such a way. Yeah. And going right into that, so popular children's programming. So you have things like comprehensive sexuality education, social and emotional learning, which I know Lisa Logan's talked a lot about, global citizenship education programs, peer-to-peer programs that I've been talking about, and then critical race theory programs. All of those things. I don't know if you guys know this, but popular children's programming have like pledged and have made alliances with UNESCO and the UN agenda and the Sustainable Development Goals to embed those things into children's programming. Like Disney in 2015 signed on. I have a list of other ones too. So Disney signed on to the UN Global Compact. The UN Global Compact is specifically geared toward businesses to get them on board with the SDGs. They signed on in 2015, and Sesame Street, PBS Kids, The Lion Guard, Bluey, Pocoyo, Peppa Pig, The Wild Kratts, all within that same time range, 2015, to promote all of those things, CSC, SEL, global citizenship, all of that stuff. So, yeah, I have pictures here in my presentation about our team going to the Summit of the Future New York, and there's like the Hello Kitty, and all these different colors. We support the Sustainable Development Goals, so they're really marketing towards younger and younger kids. So religion is a really interesting thing.
Let's talk about that.
Yeah. A lot of people don't know we have the Sustainable Development Goals, and we also have the Inner Development Goals. The Inner Development Goals are focused on changing from within. And so the Inner Development Goals were formally proposed in 2021 by a group of individuals and organization thought leaders to create this Inner Development Goal Solutions Network. And what's really interesting is that on page 4 of UNESCO's report, Peace Education in the 21st Century, again, we're redefining words. So peace isn't just defined as like, not being at war. They've created this really big umbrella of negative peace and positive peace. And one thing that we're realizing and recognizing, and I'd love to share more in depth in the next episode, is that the UN is under a revamping. They're streamlining everything and they're merging with science and technology. So it's called the UN Revitalization Project, and or the UN 2.0. And they have in it this quintet of change. One of them is behavior modification, like it's openly says that. And then another one is that they have peacekeeping and through the digital aspect. So over the last 3 years, I've heard a lot of different countries and presentations talking about peacekeeping online, like digital peacekeeping. So they're really, really pushing that hard. So the minute that happens is we really have no forum anymore to
I think you probably need to clarify what digital peacekeeping means. I think to us, we get it because, peacekeepers, the UN blue helmets, it's the military. So for our audience, what is digital peacekeeping?
Digital peacekeepers. So peacekeepers in the virtual online realm means that, and this kind of idea of negative peace and positive peace, that anything under the sun can be couched as that. Like if for example, a religion that believes in, a male and a female, that is violence, that is a violent idea, and that you need to be shut down because you're not keeping the peace for your ideas. It means that our language can be monitored and can be shut down. And it means our ideas, our ways of, congregating with other people in different online formats or forums to talk about the things that we want to talk about could all be potentially labeled as
hate speech.
Hate speech, right.
And it's the erosion of our First Amendment rights and potentially even eventually programs like this. Yeah, absolutely. They're really pushing it for it hard at the UN. And they're saying that there's all sorts of online digital violence towards women and girls, and that we need this for safety. And they're really using that angle to try to convince countries that we need digital peacekeeping.
Censorship.
Yeah, censorship, absolutely. So so those are the different ways that the UN is controlling the social landscape of our society. And the infrastructural component of it is getting infused and integrated completely through science and technology. So through digital IDing, central banking, digital currency, high surveillance monitoring technologies, all of those things that are embedded in the cities.
And that's what we're going to get into next time.
Yeah.
I think people will find that very interesting. But you need to understand this too, because this is the underpinnings of it.
Yeah. So it's like, we can fight all of these social challenges that we're seeing, but if we're locked out of our bank accounts, right? If we can't pump gas, if we don't have access to, just basic city infrastructure, if we don't toe that social line, like we're really bound, we're really in bad shape.
Yeah.
And the technological, like through blockchain technologies and different things that we can talk about next time, through a lot of which, our Silicon Slopes is making quite a bit of money through all of those software programs that are, making for this.
Yeah, the more you learn, the more you realize how significant a role Utah plays in everything that is coming.
Absolutely.
It's so easy to think of Utah as some insignificant podunk, backward state, and it's absolutely you could not be further from the truth. These globalists, Utah is smack dab in the middle of everything, and it is ground zero. That we've been saying that for years. So as we wind up, I'd like to give you a chance to give your final thoughts to our viewers and listeners.
Yeah, I think that, like, what do we do? Like, what now? And the solution is actually really amazing, and it's a really powerful one. So first, I would advise anybody listening to this, like, it's about time that you create a really deep and personal relationship with a higher power, with your God, okay? It is critical because you need that internal resilience and strength and discernment to be able to even understand what all is happening. And it can really bring you down. And so you need that kind of light and focus and discernment so that you can stand strong and not be shaken by this stuff. So that's number one. Number two, when you do that, your energy, this positive energy of like, I can do something, it ripples into your family. And your family is your first commitment outside of you getting directly connected to God. It's your family. So strengthen those relationships, heal any wounds that are there. This is bigger than political divide. Oh, my cousin, is liberal and I'm a conservative. Like, throw all that stuff away. This is bigger than anything, okay? So build those relationships with your family. Like, mend those broken relationships. Heal from that. Do your part. And then after that is build and strengthen your communities, whether it's your homeschool community or it's your church community, any community that you can be a part of to strengthen, like, do it. Because as things change, we're going to need to rely on one another in really powerful and significant ways. And the other stuff is exercise your freedoms. Talk about God in the public square. Grow a garden, be self-reliant. Food sovereignty is a really big thing, know how to take care of your family and how to be self-reliant if things were to change, if you were to get shut out of the mainstream, society at some point or another. And then get educated. Big Ocean Women, we have a lot of leaders that are trained on this. If you get a group of 25 to 30 people in your home, we will have a trained Big Ocean Women representative come and present on this stuff directly from our decade of experience and dozens of UN conferences that we've attended. We want to educate people. We want to help you be aware. And self-reliance is really key. Spiritual self-reliance, physical self-reliance, all of that.
I love it.
Awesome.
Alexia, what do you got?
No, I mean, it's really mind-blowing stuff, and I really appreciate the way you broke everything down. I can't help but think about some of the underlying themes here, which in the mid to late 20th century, things like Keynesian ideologies and even like Saul Lewinsky's progressive ideologies are now being touted by the UN as not only mainstream, but things that we should be promoting, whether it's through gender or through social strategic disruption. So it just makes you wonder how we got to this point from progressive, radical ideology to now mainstreaming this. And we almost are just eating it up hook, line, and sinker as the norm. No one bats an eyelash anymore when you go to fill out a form and it asks you what gender you are, and it's more than two options. This is now common day normal rhetoric. So I think we also need to take a look at where we came from. There are some things that need to be modernized and there's some things that need to be caught up to the times, but this does not feel like we're heading in the right direction.
Right. And yeah, I'm really excited to talk about the next iteration of it with science and technology in cities, because I really want to outline the transhumanist agenda that undergirds all of this.
Yes.
And I think that we can pull a lot of people in when we expose and explain that this is literally going to end everything that we know and love. Like, even with our planet, everybody hears all about the planet, right? Like, all of that's going to go to waste with this transhumanist agenda that is really undergirding a lot of this stuff. So.
And while it all seems so futuristic, you think about, transhumanism, where, what do they say? Flesh meets iron. That can't even happen in our lifetime. Well, you see what Elon Musk is touting now and Neuralink, and it's coming.
Yeah.
It's coming.
Well, we have a huge, transhumanist organization here in Utah. So, yeah, the Mormon transhumanists,
Now, that's something you guys should look into. The Mormon what is it? Is that what they call themselves? Mormon transhumanists? Yeah, I know there's a book in Deseret Book, I think, even.
Yeah. Yeah.
So going back to where we started, I am a big believer in the power of the individual. Again, we're the people, the power of you. I do not believe that our safety comes from a king or from a president or from a governor. I believe in the power of the bottom up, of the grassroots. And that's why everything we do is trying to get the people to stand up and to be aware of what's in your backyard. And this is, if you've been through this whole show, I think you're very aware of how nefarious what's going on with the United Nations is. I find it terrifying, especially with all the survivors and the victims we're talking to on a, very regular basis. And you see how, the abuse, and it's heartbreaking to see it, but it starts to make sense when you understand that this stuff is being pushed and these people are looking for this type of philosophy to justify their evil, because in their mind, it's not evil. But the question is, what can you do? And the fact of the matter is, you have no idea how powerful you are. And there is a reason that right now they want you focused on football, on, your iPhone, and on TV, and on what's going on in DC, and on Doge, and all those things. We're being entertained. Because the more, again, just like bread and circus, because everyone is so focused on bread and circus, it wasn't an accident that they spent so much money on bread and circus. Because the last thing they wanted was the people rising up and cleaning house while they still had a chance to do that. We still have a chance, and I believe the ultimate thing for us is not about doing podcasts. We don't think doing podcasts is going to change the state. But what we do believe is that waking people up can inspire people to take the next step, which is stand up and push back the right way. And I believe that there's power in peaceful revolutions. In fact, that is why the left is so, and it's not the left and right, it's all one. That's why the elite are so good at manipulating what they call useful idiots to standing up, to fighting, to protesting, because it works. And I'm going to read this quote because it's very relevant, because you think, what can we do? Well, especially the United Nations, it's in New York, it's a global organization, but guess what? They meet in your backyard. Here's a quote. All governments, including the most tyrannical, can only rule for extended durations if they have the general support of the populace. Not only are those in power vastly outnumbered by those over whom they rule, but governments rely on the subjugated population to provide them with a continual supply of resources and manpower. If one day enough people refuse to obey and stop surrendering their wealth and property, their oppressors would, in the words of Le Boitit, become naked and undone as nothing, just as when the root receives no nourishment, the branch withers and dies. Mass submission to even the most oppressive political regimes is always a voluntary servitude, one based on popular consent. Obviously, there is no need in fighting to overcome this single tyrant, for he is automatically defeated if the country refuses consent to its own enslavement. It is not necessary to deprive him of anything, but simply to give him nothing. There is no need that a country make an effort to do anything for itself, provided it does not do anything against itself. It is therefore the inhabitants themselves who permit, or rather bring about, their own subjugation, since by ceasing to submit, they would put an end to their own servitude. A people enslaves itself, cuts its own throat, when having a choice between being vassals and being freemen. It deserts its liberties and takes on the yoke, gives consent to its own misery, or rather apparently welcomes it. That has always been true, and I believe it is still true. I believe that there is nothing that the establishment fears more than the people waking up and going to the streets. We saw the power when we had the vigil of 200 people who showed up there and saying, we're not going to accept or tolerate these people like Shalom Levitt, David Levitt's wife, David Hamlin, to be running free and not be investigated, while these victims and survivors are not receiving due process. I believe that when we start standing up in the numbers of the thousands, change can happen. What I would love to see is you take the lead, and next time there's an event, a UN event here where they're pushing this stuff, I would love to help encourage our listeners, our viewers, to show up outside the gates of these UN meetings and say no. I think our elected officials shouldn't be walking in there bragging and posting pictures of them on social media with these unelected global bureaucrats. They should be ashamed. And I think they're not going to be ashamed unless the people make it something that we're not okay with anymore.
That's a good point. Yeah. Yeah, I think that that definitely needs to happen. And I think Big Ocean Women, we're collaborating with people, and there are a lot of really important coalitions and networks that are in the UN, like we're UN accredited, right? And that we meet there because there are so many good people of the world that need support. Like these countries that are literally fighting tooth and nail. Like if you guys only knew the African nations that are trying to fight to preserve the idea of mother, and small island nations that are trying to preserve the family, like they need help. And so we can't just also, it's like we have to protect here at home, but we also have to protect there as well simultaneously because that's where it's happening. So it's like a two-edged issue that we have to do. And Big Ocean Women, that's our thing.
Yeah.
Like we do it at the home front and there.
And all that we're seeing is the coming attractions of those countries of what will eventually come here if we don't stand up and stop it now.
Yeah. So as we wrap up, here's what I'm going to ask is that, the time for sitting by is over. We will continue to wake people up and try to get information so that you can share that with people because we are walking into dark times. These prophetic times about the mark of the beast, it is all unrolling. It is all being rolled out right in front of our eyes. God sent us to this earth at this time to stand, to make a difference. We were not sent here to sit on the sidelines and eat popcorn while we watch his kingdom and Satan start to rule and reign with blood and horror on this earth. We have a responsibility, and I believe we can be powerful if we stand in numbers. And I believe that's what God expects because it's always worked. So, we will work with you. And when the next time there's an event, we will stand there and we will, and I hope many of you, and I know you will, because you guys have shown you'll stand with these survivors. And I believe a lot of you are against this destruction of our country. And I know a lot of you say, what can we do? What can we do? Guess what? It's time. It is time to start standing up. It is time to stand up to Cox. It is time to stand up to these politicians that are destroying our country. And so anyways, thank you guys. And I'm talking about peacefully. I believe in peaceful revolution, but I believe there's nothing more powerful than when you have 3% of the population. In fact, it's never not worked. Anytime you have 3% of the population stand and peacefully stand up against tyranny, it has never failed. And that is what exactly our founding fathers said. Samuel Adams doesn't take a majority to prevail, but rather an irate minority. We should be irate, keen on setting brush fires of freedom. We should be talking to our friends, keen on setting brush fires of freedom in the minds of men. So thank you guys for listening. Thank you for supporting us. Thank you for doing your part. This is you guys. We love you. We appreciate you, and we'll see you on the next one.